how can consciousness give us a deeper understanding of science and the scientific process? Science has a place for learning about the human mind in psychology or neuroscience, and even the scientific process overall has a certain amount of essential element of consciousness in the fact that the basic functions required to do good science require a certain level of consciousness in the first place to be able to make observations and record information and to form conclusions or analyze that information, and to recognize that the scientific process is a reflection of a certain kind of consciousness. And yet when consciousness is used, it's often the biggest thing is expressed as, is consciousness something that is projected from the human brain, or is consciousness beyond the brain? And of course, now with quantum physics and modern science, there's a lot of understanding that there is some level of relative consciousness in the material world, that somehow everything appears to be conscious, that it's not just the human brain, but there's in relativity, the whole thing that Einstein understood about quantum entanglement, or the fact that atoms or electrons at different ends of the universe can respond to one another, or something as more about awareness, or some kind of what we'd think of as sentience of a tree or something like that, to be able to respond to electrical impulses or changes in temperature or different things that we would consider sentience or awareness as opposed to consciousness. That there's a certain kind of energy that we would say is carried in the ocean, on an ocean wave, or on the wind, or in a cloud, that there's something about nature itself beyond living beings, as we call them, that is still somehow reminiscent of something that we see in living beings. And perhaps for many people who are more inclined towards spirituality, the first thing that many people think of might be crystals, that there's a certain imprinting of information that can be done with crystals, and that's why our cell phones are powered by silicon. That's why supercomputers are made out of the same material as quartz crystals, and that water and quartz crystals share a same polar molecular structure. You have H2O and silicon dioxide, SiO2. It's the same structure. For whatever reason, this triangle shape is really useful for creating superstructures of atoms that then are capable of encoding information, and we don't know why that is, but there's a funny saying that the reason why we exist is because water wanted to get up and walk around, that we live on a water planet, that we don't really know how water came into being in the way that it did, but there's a lot of it, and it does feel very connected to the actual development of awareness, or self-awareness, of the fact that we can be aware of being aware, and that somehow water feels very connected to this question of consciousness. And yet the going beyond, deeper into the cosmos, as it were, are we to say that when we think about the physical created universe, that we think of it as being, fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional or 11th dimensional, that there's superstring theory and these different ways of now understanding that the world is beyond just three linear dimensions or a fourth dimension of time, that there is a deeper way of seeing the world, and that the more we get into it, the more we feel like whatever we've been told is only a half truth, or that the world as it seems is a projection, or that everything is essentially a dream, or that it's a thought, that we are all living in the constructs of some greater mind that is expressing itself and learning about itself through each one of us, and that we are returning that information back to this one universal mind that is constantly expanding through individualized experience that we are all having, and that somehow, as complexity increases, that this allows things like humans to exist over the span of billions of years. And for the sake of understanding why that's happening, it's a mystery, and it's wonderful, and it's great to explore these things from the lens of science, because we might as well. We're here. Like, if we were to, chalk everything up to everything that's already been discovered and say, okay, fine, that's great, like, you can do that, and also, like, learn what you can about it, and also recognize that going beyond what we've already learned is a great way to find out more and to increase that learning. And yet that learning is not just an external, let's do what we think of as science. Of course that science is valuable, and yet of course it's why we have art too. It's why we have the expression of the innate human capacity that does not have to be dependent on external learned knowledge of the outside world, that we're already somehow connected to this deeper reservoir of information that is beyond anything that we have experienced, or perhaps it's somehow connected to our DNA and the way that that information has been encoded over billions of years, that somehow something within us is beyond what we can experience, and yet expressing it, we may be able to do a fraction of that, and that's okay, that there's a place for us to savor the indescribable essence of what we are, because perhaps if we were to call that consciousness, or perhaps whatever we choose to call that consciousness that is a fundamental fabric of everything that's around us, that is beyond space and time, and yet constituting space and time itself too, that if we are to go deeper within ourselves and connect to those layers, or go deeper and deeper until we go beyond all those layers, that then we won't need the scientific expressions or concepts, and yet they're valuable in getting us somewhere to that point where we can say, okay, now I understand the limitations of this, or I understand that this is useful for X, Y, and Z in the physical world, and I know that as a human being, we can always go one step deeper, go beyond. And that we're all here, and we can choose how far we go. And that's something that is up to each one of us, and is the great joy of life, and sharing that wherever we happen to be, or however we happen to take that journey. And so it all is like the Ouroboros, or the snake eating its own tail, that it's all returning right here back to the present moment where we get to share it. Thank you.